Something knew your migration routes before you used them. It knew which gaps in the mountain passes your ancestors had to cross, which river bends they'd stop at, which narrow valleys had no alternative route. It positioned itself there and waited, not once, not opportunistically, consistently, for generations. This animal had built a model of human behavior so precise it could predict where your bloodline would appear before your ancestors even made the decision to move. That's not predation, that's intelligence. And for 50,000 years, it was pointed directly at us. Here's what we actually know. Across 17 documented sites in Europe and Asia, sites spanning 40,000 years of human prehistory, archaeologists keep finding the same thing. Human remains with predation patterns that don't match opportunistic attack. The angle of entry, the depth, the specific targeting of the back of the skull, the base of the spine. These aren't random. They're consistent. One animal, one method, refined over millennia. Now, I want you to hold 3 questions in your head, because we're going to come back to all 3. First, how does a predator teach a hunting method to the next generation? Second, at what point did our ancestors realize what was happening to them? And third, the one that genuinely kept me up at night researching this. Why did the attacks cluster around one specific type of human camp? We'll get to all of it, but to understand the answers, we need to go back to the beginning of the pattern, much further back than most people expect. Before we go further, stop, because I need you to understand what kind of animal we're talking about. Most people, when they picture a prehistoric predator, imagine something like a larger version of what exists today. A bigger lion, a heavier wolf. That framing is wrong, and it's going to make everything that follows hit harder once you correct it. The Homotherium, the scimitar-toothed cat, wasn't built for the kill. It was built for the chase. Long legs relative to body length. A spine that could extend fully in a gallop, like a cheetah. Nasal passages enlarged for high oxygen intake at speed. This animal could run at sustained pace across open steppe for distances that would exhaust a modern horse. It didn't ambush from trees. It ran prey into the ground. And new isotopic analysis of Homotherium bone collagen, published in 2020, revealed something that rewrote our understanding of its behavior entirely. It was eating human flesh with enough regularity to show up in its dietary signature. Not occasionally, regularly, we were on the menu, and it had optimized its body over hundreds of thousands of years to keep us there. But here's what comes next that's even harder to process, and we'll get to it in just a moment. In 2019, a team at the Natural History Museum in London published an analysis of Homotherium territorial patterns across Western Europe. What they found was this: the animal's known range contracted and expanded in near-perfect inverse correlation with early human population density. When human groups grew, Homotherium pulled back. When human groups fragmented, after a harsh winter, a failed hunt season, a disease event, Homotherium moved back in. It was tracking us, not just as prey, as a variable. It understood, at whatever level a predator understands, that human group size determined its own risk level. Let that sit for a second. This wasn't a lion stumbling across a human camp. This was an animal that had developed a model of human behavior sophisticated enough to time its own territorial movements around our vulnerabilities. And here's where it connects back to that ambush point I mentioned at the start, the one used for 800 years. We now believe those long-term ambush sites were positioned specifically at human migration corridors. The gaps in mountain ranges, the river crossings, the narrow valley passes that our ancestors had to use because there was no other route. It wasn't waiting for any animal. It was waiting for us, specifically, deliberately. at the one place it knew we'd have to appear. Now, I promised you we'd come back to when our ancestors realized what was happening to them. We're almost there. But first, there's one piece of evidence that changes the entire emotional register of this story, and it's the piece nobody leads with. In the caves of southern France and northern Spain, scattered among the most famous prehistoric art in the world, there are images of Homotherium that have puzzled researchers for decades. Not because they're rare, because of how they're drawn. In over 60 separate depictions across 14 cave sites, the Homotherium is shown in a specific posture. Low to the ground, mid-stalk, ears flattened, body weight shifted to the rear haunches. The attack position, every single time. Not feeding, not resting, not in profile as a status symbol, always stalking. These images are behavioral field notes. Our ancestors were documenting the precise moment of danger, the specific body language that preceded an attack. They were training future generations to recognize the threat signature before it struck.
This is the piece that nobody leads with, because what it means is that at some point, some specific generation of humans realized the pattern, realized they were being hunted systematically, deliberately, at predictable locations, and decided to fight back with the only weapon they had that the Homotherium didn't: information.
They couldn't outrun it. They couldn't outfight it alone. But they could teach their children exactly what it looked like in the 3 seconds before it killed you. That's when the dynamic began to shift. Slowly, painfully. And we'll get to exactly how that shift played out, because it's one of the most consequential arms races in the history of life on Earth. You're still here. Good. Because what comes next is the part of this story that most evolutionary biologists find genuinely unsettling. Not because of what the Homotherium did, because of what we did back. Here's what the fossil record shows, and it's subtle enough that it took decades to recognize. Starting approximately 35,000 years ago, something changes in Homotherium kill sites. The bones tell a different story. Prior to that threshold, Homotherium kill sites show solitary or pair hunts, 2 sets of bite marks, clean and efficient. After that threshold, the kill sites begin showing evidence of interrupted hunts, partially consumed prey, drag marks that stop abruptly, tooth marks that suggest the animal fled mid-feed. Something was scaring it away, not a larger predator. The isotopic signatures rule that out. The interruptions cluster in spring and autumn, human migration seasons. We were interrupting its kills, deliberately. A 2021 paper in the Journal of Human Evolution proposed the mechanism: coordinated noise and fire harassment. Small human groups, too small to fight directly, using percussion, firebrands, and coordinated positioning to drive Homotherium off fresh kills and take the meat themselves. We weren't hunting it yet. We were robbing it. And every time that happened, every time a human group successfully took food from a Homotherium and survived, that information went into the story network, refined, passed forward, tried again. The predator that had studied us for 50,000 years had finally found something studying it back. And within 10,000 years, a blink in evolutionary time, the power balance had shifted beyond recovery. Now, I promised you we'd come back to the third question. Why did Homotherium attacks cluster around one specific type of human camp, and not others? The answer is in the fire. Analysis of Homotherium-adjacent human sites shows a consistent split. Camps with central fire pits, with evidence of communal sleeping arrangements around the fire, show almost no evidence of predation. Peripheral shelters, the ones with smaller, individual fires, or no fire at all, show disproportionate attack evidence. The Homotherium had learned to read fire. Not just that fire meant humans, but that fire arrangement told it something about group size, group cohesion, and therefore group defensive capability. Scattered fires meant fragmented groups. Fragmented groups meant lower risk. It was reading our infrastructure the way we read animal tracks. And here's what that means. The humans who survived, the ones whose genetics became yours, were the ones who understood, consciously or not, that the arrangement of their camp was a survival signal. The ones who kept the communal fire, the ones who slept close together, those people passed on their genes. The ones who didn't, who kept individual fires, who slept at the edges, who fragmented, they left a different kind of record, their bones. This is why you have an instinct toward firelight and group proximity in unfamiliar environments. That preference wasn't arbitrary, it was selected for by exactly this. Remember the migration routes I described at the very start? The mountain passes, the river bends, the narrow valleys with no alternative route. Here's what I didn't tell you then. At some point, those ambush sites stopped being used. Abruptly. No gradual decline. Just gone from the record. Something changed. Homotherium went extinct approximately 28,000 years ago in Europe. For a long time, the assumption was climate, the Pleistocene megafauna collapse, habitat loss, prey scarcity. But the numbers don't support that. Homotherium's prey species, the mega herbivores it had coexisted with for millions of years, didn't collapse until significantly later. There was no food shortage. A 2023 analysis in Nature Ecology and Evolution ran population viability models against Homotherium's known range contraction. The conclusion was uncomfortable. Climate alone couldn't account for the speed or geography of the collapse. The collapse tracked human expansion. Specifically, the spread of coordinated multi-group hunting networks. The same fire harassment and noise coordination techniques that had first appeared 35,000 years ago. We didn't just stop being prey. We applied the same systematic, learned, transmitted strategy that the Homotherium had used against us, and we used it back. Those migration corridor ambush sites, the mountain passes it had used for centuries, we started using them too, for the same reason. It didn't stop being used because the predator moved on. It stopped being used because the predator was gone. We closed the loop, and we did it using the same thing it had used against us. We learned it back. Here's what this story actually is. It's not a nature documentary about an extinct cat. It's the origin story of the thing that makes you human, not language, not tools, not fire. The ability to learn a threat, encode it, transmit it, and refine it across generations until the threat is gone. Every warning your parents gave you that you passed on without thinking, every instinct you have about which environments feel safe and which feel wrong, every preference for the lit room over the dark one, the group over the solitary, the known route over the shortcut. That's 40,000 years of field data running in your nervous system right now. The Homotherium spent 50,000 years optimizing to kill your ancestors. Your ancestors spent 10,000 years optimizing to end it. You exist because the optimization worked. Not because we were stronger, not because we were faster, because we were the only species on Earth that could look at something trying to kill us and learn it. Really learn it. Deeply enough to pass it forward. Specifically enough to act on it. Patiently enough to wait for the right moment. That's not a survival story. That's the beginning of strategy, of science, of civilization. It started in a narrow gap in the rock face, and it ended with the predator gone. If that changed how you think about what's running in your head right now, I want you to do something. Not subscribe yet. I want you to think about one warning you were given as a child that you've never fully examined. One instinct you have about safety or danger that you've always assumed was personal. It probably isn't. It's probably much older than you. If you want to keep pulling at that thread, the next video goes deeper into the specific evolutionary pressures that shaped every one of those instincts. I think it's the most important piece of the series. I'll see you there.